What if the girl you laughed at on the street turned out to be the daughter of the most powerful woman in the country? She wasn't wearing designer brands, she wasn't trending, she was just walking alone in a coat you thought was funny, with shoes you thought were sad. And when the cameras turned on her to make her pain go viral, no one expected what happened next. Because when her mother showed up, the street fell silent. And what she said in front of everyone changed the internet forever. She was just trying to cross the street. Her hands were stuffed into the pockets of a faded beige coat. One button, missing her boots, scuffed at the toes, and her scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck to block the bitter wind. The city didn't care who you were if you walked quietly and didn't ask for anything. And that's exactly what Lena did. Walked quietly, head down, eyes focused on the concrete in front of her. Not the storefronts dripping in glass and gold, or the people spilling laughter from cafes she couldn't afford to enter. But the city noticed her anyway. Or rather, they did. A group of influencers' phone cameras mounted on tripods, ring lights clamped to their backpacks, staged near the corner of Lexington and 54th. They were filming one of those street games for clicks and comments. "Hey man," one of them called to a passerby, grinning. "Would you date a girl who dresses like that?" The camera panned to Lena. The man snorted. "Her bro. I'd give her $1, not a date." Laughter erupted. Another girl with perfect nails and a fur-lined jacket pretended to gag. "She looks like she got dressed in a lost and found box." The camera stayed on. Lena. The microphone hovered toward her like a weapon disguised in plastic foam. "Miss, do you have anything to say?" Lena's steps didn't falter, but her throat closed. She kept walking, heart-pounding, cheeks burning. The laughter followed her for another block, then another and another, until it wasn't just echoing off the buildings. It was bouncing around in her chest like a scream. She couldn't let out. She didn't stop walking until she reached the edge of the subway station, where no one knew her, where the platform was just noise and concrete. She stared at her reflection in the scratched metal panel beside the tracks. Her coat was dirty. Her eyes looked tired. She looked like someone the world had decided didn't matter. And what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman watching that clip from a sleek office across town had just turned her phone over, stood up and whispered, "No one humiliates my daughter." By midnight, Lena's face was everywhere. Not because of something she said, not because of a triumph or an act of bravery, but because strangers decided she looked funny enough to become content. The clip spread like wildfire, reposted by meme pages and reaction channels, shared with captions like, "This is why standards matter," and she thought that was an outfit. Her walked in seconds of quiet dignity was slowed down, zoomed in, remixed with sound effects and cruel edits. One influencer recreated it in parody, stuffing a pillow in her coat and walking with a fake hunch. The comments underneath were brutal. "Someone take her to a thrift store." "Oh, wait, too late." "Why is she even outside? Does she know we have eyes?" Lena sat at the tiny kitchen table in her apartment, her cracked phone screen lighting up with notification after notification. At the diner where she worked, 2 coworkers watched the clip behind the counter and whispered just loud enough for her to hear. One even said, "Hey Lena, you're famous now." With a smirk that didn't hide the venom, she laughed it off. What else could she do? She scrubbed dishes harder than she needed to. Her fingers raw from the soap, her body moving like it was just going through the motions. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why it hurt more that no one stood up for her than the fact that millions were laughing. What made it worse was how unsurprised she felt, like she'd always known the world would turn on her. Eventually, she just hadn't expected it to be so loud. She thought about deleting her social media. She thought about quitting her job. She thought about disappearing. But something stronger than shame burned beneath her ribs. A voice buried deep saying, "This is not where your story ends." And as she turned her phone face down, something else lit up across the city. A screen, a name, a paused video, and a pair of eyes watching, eyes that once let her go, but never stopped searching. The morning was colder, harsher, like even the sky had seen the video and decided to pile on. Lena walked into the diner with her hood up her apron, folded under one arm, trying to stay invisible in a place that had never looked at her twice. Until now. A regular at the counter nudged the waiter and said, "Hey, that's the girl from the clip, right?" The cook peeked from the kitchen and chuckled. "No way, that's her, the homeless-looking chick." The manager, half busy and half amused, turned up the volume on the mounted TV, and like some cruel magic trick, there she was again. Her image frozen in mid-stride, the mockery edited in bright yellow text across the screen. From sidewalk to side-eye, who is this girl? Laughter rose from two teenagers in the back booth. She works here, one whispered loud enough. Lena froze, the apron slipping from her fingers. Her eyes darted toward the door, her lungs begging her to breathe, but she couldn't. Not here, not under fluorescent lights and fake smiles, and a room full of people who had just been handed permission to laugh at her like it was a lunch special. She moved without thinking out from behind the counter, past the booths, past the manager yelling something about her shift out onto the sidewalk where the cold slapped her awake. She stood still on the same street that had started it all, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. And then she pulled out her phone. She stared at the number at the bottom of her contacts list. No name, just a single letter. E. She had never used it, had been told only to call it if everything ever breaks. Her thumb hovered. She could feel the panic rising, the humiliation clawing up her throat. She swallowed it down and tapped 1 ring 2. Then a voice, calm, sharp, unmistakably female. You know you were never supposed to call this number, unless you were ready. Lena didn't flinch. Her voice cracked, but she forced the words out anyway. I am ready. A pause. Where are you? Lena's eyes filled not with tears, but something deeper. The same place you left me. Another pause, longer, colder. Then finally the voice softened only slightly. Then stay there. I'm coming. Lena lowered the phone slowly. Her breath caught in her chest. And across the city, in a skyscraper lined with glass and power, Evelyn Storm stood from her desk, for the first time in days turned to her assistant and said just 2 words, find her. The wind clawed at her coat as Lena stood on the edge of the same street that made her famous for all the wrong reasons. But now the cold didn't sting half as much as the humiliation still echoing inside her. She had called a number without a name, answered by a voice that spoke like thunder in a whisper. And now she stood still, heart racing, watching, as strangers passed her without recognizing the storm that had just been set in motion. At first, nothing happened. 10 minutes. Then 15. She began to wonder if she had imagined the voice, if the call had been some strange reflex, a final thread pulled in desperation. But then the crowd shifted. A black SUV pulled around the corner, followed by a second, then a third. They didn't park. They aligned clean and deliberate, their glossy frames a mirror to the city's chaos. Doors opened without sound. From the first vehicle, a man in a charcoal suit stepped out, his expression unreadable, his eyes scanning the sidewalk like a hawk. He walked up to, Lena said nothing, and simply gave a nod to the car behind him. The door opened and out stepped a woman who didn't belong to the street. She belonged to marble boardrooms and private jets and headlines that shook markets. Evelyn Storm, her hair streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back into a flawless chignon. Her coat was black wool, tailored to precision, and her eyes sharp, pale, and cold cut through the crowd like glass. She said nothing at first, just looked at Lena, and something flickered behind those guarded eyes. She took a step forward, then another. The silence in the crowd grew heavy. Someone lifted their phone. Others began to realize who she was. A man near the edge whispered, "Is that her Evelyn Storm?" The woman who owned 3 media empires, the one who never gave interviews, the one whose name was both feared and admired. Evelyn didn't flinch at the whispers. She didn't look at the cameras. She only looked at Lena. And then, in a motion so subtle and intimate, it stunned the crowd more than any declaration. She removed her coat and placed it around her daughter's shoulders. The world seemed to pause. Evelyn's voice, low and precise, broke the silence. "You never should have had to call me." Lena blinked. I didn't know if I was allowed to. Evelyn's lips tightened. "You're my daughter. You never needed permission." The cameras began clicking now. People recording, streaming. Trying to capture a moment that didn't feel real, Evelyn turned toward them, her posture unshakable. "You filmed her humiliation. Let me film your apology." Then louder, addressing the growing crowd, she added, "This woman. You mocked, you dissected for content. She's mine, and she's worth more than all your followers combined." A silence fell so deep, it felt like snowfall. One of the influencers, the same one who had laughed during the street interview, lowered her phone slowly. Her face drained of color. Evelyn didn't wait for an answer. She turned back to Lena, placed a hand gently on her back and said, "Come with me," but Lena didn't move, not right away. She looked around at the crowd, the same sidewalk, the same eyes. But everything felt different now, because she wasn't the joke, she was the reveal, and they weren't laughing anymore. Evelyn leaned in her voice, now softer, only for Lena. "I never stopped watching. I just couldn't reach you without putting you in danger." Lena's breath caught. Danger. Evelyn gave a slight nod. "You were taken once I spent years hiding you in plain sight. I created a new identity for you, a new life. It was supposed to protect you, until the world found you again." Lena's knees weakened. "You knew where I was. I knew where you were safest." Evelyn said, "I never imagined the world would come for you like this." The truth unfurled like a thread through fabric, twisting everything Lena had believed. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been hidden, safeguarded, protected in a way so invisible it felt like absence. Her fingers gripped the coat tighter, Evelyn's coat, her mother's coat, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel cold. She felt real, seen. And when Evelyn offered her hand, she took it. Not out of weakness, but because now she finally understood the weight of what it meant to belong. They walked back toward the car together, past stunned expressions and shuddering phones, and with each step, Lena reclaimed the ground that had once betrayed her. She didn't disappear. She rose in silence, in power, and the internet that once cheered her downfall would soon be begging to understand who she truly was. The moment they stepped into the black SUV, the doors closed like steel jaws, sealing Lena away from the noise. She never asked for the ridicule she didn't deserve, and the eyes that only knew how to take. The car was silent, smooth, the city's chaos reduced to a muted blur outside bulletproof windows. Evelyn sat beside her, poised and quiet, her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. But her eyes, those razor-sharp, storm-gray eyes, flickered with something only Lena could recognize. "Guilt I should have come sooner," Evelyn said softly. Without turning her head, Lena didn't respond right away. She watched the city pass by, like it was no longer hers, as if her world had been reassembled without warning, familiar buildings now painted with questions. "Why didn't you?" She finally asked, her voice low, not angry, just raw. Evelyn inhaled deep and steady. "Because the last time I held you, they swore I'd never see you again if I didn't let you go. You were a target, not because of you, but because of me." Lena blinked her breath, catching. "I don't understand." Evelyn reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small velvet pouch and placed it in Lena's lap. "That was yours. You were wearing it the night they tried to take you. I kept it. I kept everything." Inside was a necklace, simple but unmistakable. A silver pendant in the shape of a wave, engraved with a name she hadn't heard in years. Maris, Lena's middle name. She remembered touching that necklace in her earliest memories, remembered clutching it when she was scared. And now in her hands it was a key, unlocking a story no one had ever told her. "You said they tried to take me?" Evelyn nodded, her voice tightening. "A business rival. An extortion attempt. They wanted to break me, so they used the one thing that could. But I got you back before it was too late only. You didn't remember. You were so young, you didn't even know your name, and I was told by security, by government contacts, by everyone I trusted, that the only way to keep you safe was to give you a new identity and disappear from your life until it was safe enough to return. So, you watched from a distance. Every day," Evelyn said. "Every report card, every move, every birthday. I never stopped. I couldn't." Lena held the necklace tighter. Her fingers trembled. "But then, why didn't you tell me when this video went viral?" Evelyn's eyes darkened, because that video wasn't the problem. The world mocking you wasn't new. But the world recognizing you, that was the danger. And once the wrong people knew your face, I had no choice. If I didn't act, someone else would. And this time, I wasn't going to let you slip through my hands. The SUV turned a corner and slowed in front of a towering building, all glass and silver and stillness. Lena looked up at it with wide eyes. "Where are we?" Evelyn placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Home." But Lena didn't move. She sat still, staring at her reflection in the tinted glass. She didn't look like an heiress. She didn't feel like a daughter. She looked like a girl still carrying a diner name tag in her pocket, and 1,000 comments etched into her skin like scars. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. Evelyn leaned in, her voice soft but strong. "You're not who they said you were. You never were, but you don't have to be me either. You just have to be the girl who got up when the world tried to laugh her into silence. That's the daughter I know." Lena blinked back the burn behind her eyes, and for the first time she didn't feel like she had to apologize for surviving. She stepped out of the car, and as the cameras across the street started to flash again, something inside her shifted. This time, they weren't photographing a victim. They were witnessing an arrival. It didn't take long for the world to catch up. Within 24 hours, the internet that had once devoured Lena for sport now turned its spotlight in the opposite direction. Only, this time, the clicks came with questions, the comments with disbelief, and the views with fear. The clip that had once been framed as a joke was now spliced with headlines screaming, "Daughter of billionaire media, tycoon Evelyn Storm, identified as humiliated street interview victim." The very influencers who mocked her were now deleting videos, issuing shaky apologies, and backpedaling faster than they had uploaded, but it was too late. The world had already chosen a new narrative, and it wasn't one of pity. It was power. Lena's name trended for a second time, but this time, it wasn't as the girl in the cheap coat. It was as the heir to one of the most powerful media empires in the world. Except the real twist wasn't just her bloodline. It was how deeply the world had misjudged her without ever asking who she was. In the penthouse office of Storm Holdings, Evelyn stood before a wall of monitors, each screen showing a different news outlet, each anchor asking the same question. Why didn't anyone know? She turned to Lena, who stood quietly beside her, her arms folded no longer, shrinking into herself, no longer trying to disappear. Evelyn spoke with a steady calm. "I kept your name hidden for one reason. Your safety. But I never imagined the same people I tried to protect you from would be the same ones laughing at you in the street." Lena's voice was quiet but firm. "They didn't laugh because I was a secret. They laughed because I looked like someone they thought didn't matter." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "And now they'll learn." That afternoon, Evelyn released a statement. Just one paragraph. No publicist, no filters. "The girl you mocked is my daughter. You didn't just humiliate a stranger. You tried to humiliate blood family, and I won't forget who profited from it." Within hours, partnerships crumbled, sponsors pulled out. Brands distanced themselves from the influencers who had started it all. One by one, their empires built on mockery and vanity began to crack. But Lena didn't celebrate. She didn't clap back. She didn't post. Because for her, the real shock wasn't that people had turned against her. It was that they now wanted to worship her for being the same girl they once despised. When a popular talk show requested her first live interview, Evelyn asked if she was ready. Lena said no. "They don't deserve my silence just to spin it into something beautiful," she said. "And they don't deserve my voice until they've learned to listen." Later that night, Evelyn revealed the final piece of the story, the third twist, the one even Lena hadn't known. "The necklace you kept," Evelyn said, opening a drawer and placing a second pendant beside it, identical, except for one thing. Yours was marked with an L, this one with an E. They were a matching set, yours and mine. Custom made, Lena stared at them side by side, the two halves of a story that had been hidden in plain sight. "So, I was never lost," she whispered. "You were stolen," Evelyn corrected. "And I spent 18 years building a fortress for the day. I could get you back." Lena looked down at the matching pendants, her fingers brushing over the silver edges, and something inside her, something deeper than anger, deeper than shock, finally settled. She hadn't been weak, she had been hidden. And now that she was found, the world would never look at her the same way again. But more importantly, she would never look at herself the same way again. The world waited for her transformation, waited for the press-ready debut, the designer gown, the dramatic speech at some billion-dollar gala with marble staircases and crystal lights. But Lena didn't give them what they expected. Instead, she stepped out 1 week later, wearing the same coat. They mocked her for the same scuffed boots, her hair pulled back the way it always was, nothing polished, nothing curated, nothing approved. And she didn't arrive in a motorcade. She walked alone. Back to the very corner where the cameras had first found her. This time, she wasn't the target. She was the reason the street was packed with reporters, onlookers, strangers holding signs that read, "Walk with Lena." Evelyn had offered to shut it all down, to buy the rights to the footage, to silence every influencer with a single call, but Lena had said no. If they film my worst moment, she said, then they'll watch me take it back. She stood on the same sidewalk facing the same spot where her humiliation had once gone viral, and for a moment, she just looked at it. Then she turned to the crowd. No microphones, no bodyguards, just her voice. "This coat," she said, fingers gripping the collar. "You laughed at it, said it made me invisible, but it kept me warm when I walked to work every day. It held my breath when people stared like I didn't belong. And it carried me through a city that only pretends to care about dignity if it comes wrapped in silk." The crowd went still. She kept speaking. "I didn't grow up with money. I didn't grow up knowing I had power, but I grew up knowing how to survive. And now I know that surviving doesn't make you less. It makes you more." One reporter shouted, "What will you do now that the world knows who you are?" Lena paused, then smiled, not a perfect smile, not a trained one, just real. "I'm going to build something for girls like me. Not the kind of help that hands them a mask to wear, but a space where they don't have to hide who they are, just to be safe." Evelyn stood at a distance watching, not from behind velvet ropes, but from the edge of the crowd. She didn't need to be front and center. She had already won her battle. This was Lena's. Now. Her choice, her fight, her face. And the fourth twist, the one no one saw coming, wasn't just that Lena had power. It was that she didn't use it to erase what had happened. She used it to rewrite what came next. Not revenge, not retreat, but revelation. She didn't want to silence the street, she wanted to change it, forever. What Lena did on that sidewalk echoed far beyond the city block. It slipped through phone screens into classrooms, onto kitchen counters, and into the hearts of people who had been made to feel small for far too long. The clip of her speech, filmed by a stranger and uploaded without edits, spread faster than the one that mocked her. Not because it was louder, but because it was honest. It wasn't filtered or rehearsed or repackaged for sympathy. It was just a girl in a coat the world tried to shame. Standing in the middle of her pain, refusing to be erased. Hashtags emerge within hours. Walk like Lena. Her voice matters not. Your content. Girls from across the globe posted photos in their worn jackets, thrifted clothes, no makeup, no apologies, with captions like "they laughed at me too. But now I stand taller." Stores that once ignored her requests to browse suddenly issued public apologies. One luxury brand offered a campaign. Lena turned it down. "You didn't want me when I was silent," she said. "You don't get me now, just because the cameras are watching." Her refusal made headlines. But what touched more hearts than the headlines was what she did behind them. She launched a foundation quietly, with no press release, just a one-page website and a mission statement. Visibility is not a privilege, it's right. The foundation didn't hand out money, it handed out moments. It gave girls safe places to speak. Job training without judgment and mentorship, without masks. And it spread faster than any brand deal could have taken her. In one school, a teacher played her speech before morning announcements. In another, a girl once mocked for her accent read Lena's quote out loud at a talent show and brought the room to tears. Lena didn't post about these things. She showed up to them, sat in the back rows, spoke softly when the cameras left, and still her voice carried one day as she walked down a familiar street. Now repaved, a little girl tugged at her sleeve and said, "I saw your video. My brother used to laugh at me when I wore my cousin's coat. Now he doesn't." Lena knelt, smiled, and said, "That's because you made it yours." And as the city moved around her faster, noisier, as chaotic as ever, Lena didn't rush to catch up. She walked at her own pace with purpose. And this time, when people stared, it wasn't because they wanted to humiliate her. It was because they had learned something from a girl they once tried to make invisible, who now made the world stop and see. When the headlines finally faded and the noise of virality began to settle, something deeper remained, something more permanent than views, more powerful than trending topics. It lived in the way people walked down the street a little straighter, a little less afraid. It lived in the pause before a cruel joke, in the hesitation before someone hit record on a stranger. And somewhere between a sidewalk and a skyscraper, Lena Storme had become more than a symbol. She had become a shift. In a quiet studio far from the flashes and chaos, Dr. Lillian Reyes, a cultural anthropologist and media ethicist, leaned forward in her chair, her voice soft but certain. What Lena did, she said, was take back narrative power. Not through vengeance, not by rising above others, but by standing still and letting the world recalibrate around her. She tapped the cover of a new report on digital dignity, one inspired by Lena's case. We've talked about cancel culture, redemption arcs, digital shaming, but we rarely talk about reclamation, about the radical act of not letting other people write your ending. On the screen behind her footage played of Lena returning to the diner, not to work, not to perform, but to tip every single staff member she once worked beside. No cameras, just a moment of grace, and then another clip. A young girl giving a class presentation on resilience, her final slide, a photo of Lena with the caption, "The girl they laughed at, the girl who changed everything," Dr. Reyes continued. Lena reminded us that humiliation doesn't destroy you, the fear of it does. And when she stood in the same place where it happened, not to erase it but to own it, he broke the cycle. The screen faded to black. A quote appeared, handwritten, familiar. "Now they tried to make me small. I stood where they broke me and didn't move." Then silence. No applause, no summary. Just the echo of every moment where someone had been made to feel lesser, now reframed by the voice of a girl who had once walked through shame and decided never to bow to it again. And that silence, it wasn't emptiness, it was reverence, the kind that lingers long after the lights go out. They didn't just mock a stranger, they mocked someone's daughter. And when they found out she was the daughter of a billionaire, they panicked. But they missed the real twist. It wasn't her bloodline that made her powerful. It was the fact that she came back to the same sidewalk and didn't flinch. She didn't seek revenge. She gave the world a lesson in worth one quiet step at a time. And now, every girl who's ever been laughed at just got a little louder.